Okay, thanks everyone for joining this presentation on secure capture for cloud applications. This is an encore performance from a presentation that was given at the Infosource Capture conference a few weeks ago in Chicago in regards to the mega trends of capture to cloud services. At that conference, this was presented by a hardcore cryptographer person that has spent many, many years in that industry, and he presented from the very technical point of view of why security is important. Today's presentation is by me, who happens to have a background in as a network administrator. So I had to balance easy user experiences with the security aspects. So I've actually lived that life, and having spent most of my career in the imaging industry, in the document imaging industry, I can relate to both the security concerns of just general networking and user experiences, as well as the need to provide good tools to the users themselves. So today's more about business, and I want to talk about some important things that relate to cloud applications and security. So today's event is being recorded. Everybody's on mute just to avoid any kind of background interference. So let me go ahead and start sharing here. Okay, so secure capture for cloud applications by P3iD. Today's discussion is a discussion on cybersecurity as it relates to the capture industry specific. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. It's not just, you go and subscribe to a cloud service and then that's the end of it. They expect that users are trained properly, that you review your own data policies and have your own policies. So even if you go and 100%, managed services, there's still responsibilities from your business. So it's not just buy a service and forget it. So there's many examples of that. Capital One was a great example where they used Amazon Web Services. There was a breach, and then there was a lot of finger pointing, but it takes both sides. So cybersecurity is the same thing. Key concepts of cybersecurity, as I mentioned, I'm not going to go deep into the technologies themselves, but I do want to talk about a couple key aspects of identity and access control. First and foremost, it's very logical that if you have a cloud service, you have to authenticate to it. That hasn't been the historically with scanners behind the firewall, you haven't had to do those things. Then I also want to talk about encryption. That's a very important topic for scanned documents. I also want to talk about these networking concepts of zero trust and perfect forward secrecy and how they apply to the to our technologies. And then last but not least, blockchain is not a fad. It's still really a thing in our industry. And I want to talk about some possible use cases for capture and blockchain because it's still relevant. It's not the fad of the day. So the first thing I want to say, with opportunity comes challenges too. So everybody's talking about cloud this, cloud that. Amazon's killing it, and Box is killing it, and Zoom was killing it. During all the lockdown, and everybody wants all these digital transformation tools and whatnot. So it's a great opportunity, especially for technology businesses, for sure. But it creates unique challenges, and especially unique challenges for our industry, capture. Because why? You have a document scanner that's behind a corporate firewall. You have to negotiate the firewall and then connect to a cloud service. And it's a new thing. So we have hardware devices that want to connect to cloud services. So if you just have a LinkedIn or a Facebook that you don't have peripherals connected to those to those applications, then it's no big deal. You just have a cloud service and you go use it. But we have unique challenges in our industry. So I want to talk about that a little bit because it's also an opportunity. There's not a lot of solutions out there. So if you're a solutions provider, if you're an ISV, if you're a hardware company, there's a lot of opportunity to create a very unique solution that's very valuable for the future. So with that also comes a lot of security risks, and that's the topic of today. So there's access control, identity management, single sign-on, there's encryption, there's all kinds of things that we haven't had to really deal with in our industry historically. So, so today's a talk about that. So the first thing that's sort of obvious is that capture is moving to the cloud. You know, capture's been I say it all the time, that's been a tried and true technology. It works behind the corporate firewall. It helps businesses be efficient, reduce costs, improve outcomes, and improve services. But it's been traditionally very difficult to deploy. You basically have to have almost a rocket scientist to go get trained on a particular data capture technology and learn how to set up templates and batch classes and all this. So you have to really have somebody that understands data capture very, very well. So you have to get somebody trained, you have to provision a server, and you have to install that software, and then you have to have scan licenses and review stations and export stations. You have to have all this stuff set up. So it takes a long time to set up often. It's complicated, and you have to have a massive infrastructure. So the trend, without a doubt, I think most people would agree that if you could offer this great capture service, but as a service instead of a deploy on premise, then guess what? The service is ready to go. Everybody shares the cost, and you can get a very enterprise type capture solution that does classification and indexing of semi-structured and unstructured documents at an affordable cost. So you can now have an enterprise application that's down to almost consumer and small business. So this is definitely a trend. So, but what happens as capture moves from on-premise behind the firewall to a service? You have to connect that document scanner to the capture web service. So all of a sudden, you have to do things like authentication, because it needs to know, hey, are you authorized to use this service? So it brings in this concept of identity and access management. So that's a big industry that some big names like Okta, OneLogin, Exceed, a lot of companies are in the IAM business, and in fact, Amazon and Oracle and Microsoft, this is a big part of their business. This service alone is a big deal. So there's a couple of things that are very important. So you might hear port forwarding. When you offer authentication services in the cloud, you often have to port forward. And if your Active Directory was behind the firewall, you typically don't have to do that. So when you're forwarding a port, you're opening an inbound port on your firewall to expose a service like an authentication service. So you've got to you can't just open it up and then forget about it, because that's a potential breach by opening these firewall ports. So there's some technologies out there that allows you to offer authentication services without opening inbound firewall ports. So that's a big deal. And then authentication. Are you going to authenticate against a regular user base? Are you going to authenticate against an Active Directory? Are you going to authenticate against a LDAP server? So there's a lot of different options. Maybe you use all of them. Maybe you use just one of them. So how are you going to authenticate? Are you going to use multi-factor authentication or three-factor authentication? Do you want to use biometric? So those are some topics of consideration when you're offering these kind of services. Are you going to offer single sign-on? I know this frustrates the heck out of me, is that when I start my business day, I start launching all my applications, my Office and my Salesforce and my QuickBooks. I'm having to log into all these different ones. Can you imagine just logging in once, and then I can use my capture application, my storage application, my Office 365 application, just one login. So that's really convenient. And then even one-time passwords or passwordless authentication. That's kind of the new thing, where there is no such thing as passwords, because oftentimes that's a source of a data breach. So you could just have take a picture of a QR code. It sends you just a one-time password or one-time passcode, and then you're logged into your application. So basically, the spirit of this slide is that networking between the on-premise document scanner and the cloud service is not a trivial thing. And most of the scanner manufacturers are now making IoT. They're basically IoT devices, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So the first thing to drill down, capture aside, just in in general, when we talk about identity and access management, they're related, but they're a big difference. And I'll just a few things here. Identity is who you are. It doesn't have anything to do with security. It just knows an application needs to know this is Kevin, and Kevin has access to this kind of service because I need to know what service you need and where your stuff goes. So your identity is just something so the computer knows who you are, because if you didn't log in, they wouldn't know who you are. So that's the first thing. It needs to know who you are. And then the second level is access control. So are you authorized? It's simple, yes or no. Do you have access to my capture application? Yes or no. So if you're not authorized, you don't get access. If you do, or if you are authorized, then there's different levels, obviously. Maybe I'm just maybe I'm a scanner admin person, or maybe I'm a knowledge worker, or maybe I'm a super admin. There's different line of business manager. So what kind of level access do you have? So that's next consideration. And then the type of access. Maybe a business manager has the ability to create new users, where the knowledge worker doesn't have that ability. So big difference between identity and access management. We tend to glob them together in this whole industry called IAM, but there's definitely different considerations for different reasons. So let's apply a concept of what I was talking about in regards to the scanner manufacturers transitioning from USB to network enabled. So the trend over the past couple of years is that the document scanners, a lot of them still have the USB interface, but most of them come with Ethernet and or Wi-Fi and or future like 5G, 6G connectivity. And almost every new one at least has these kind of network connectivity, and even some of them are dropping USB. So it's my prediction, just my prediction, in a couple of years, you'll see USB starting to be eliminated in almost all of them. So if the industry trend is going this direction, then it's good for our industry to make solutions that are compatible with these network-enabled devices. So you can see all the manufacturers, Canon, Epson, Kodak, Visioneer, Xerox, they all have network-enabled document scanners now. And they all have, every single one of them has a centralized scanner control utility. A Canon has OnTouch Admin, Coda, and Epson has Documents Pro Server, and Fujitsu has NX Manager, and Kodak has Infuse Platform, and Visioneer has Vast, and Xerox has Connect Key. And then there's Twain Direct, that's an open source option for all of these. So this is definitely another trend. So you've got one part of it is the network connectivity of the document scanners themselves. Then you have the centralized server that connects those devices to that server. So this is definitely cool to manage a fleet of scanners efficiently. So that's great. And then the second trend as far as software is the efficiencies of processing. So as I just mentioned previously, as data capture moves to the cloud, the shared expense of all the companies that are contributing to this subscription allows that enterprise software to be used by everybody, by common people and small businesses. So things like multi-tenancy and microservices and hosted identities and vendor encryption, you can get all these services from the cloud services. So you have these two mega trends of the hardware manufacturers with centralized control and network attached scanners, and then software companies going to cloud services. So if this is all great, this is fantastic, this is beautiful efficiency, but what happens? The hackers come in, okay? So the first concept is the idea of encryption. And you have basically two kinds of encryption. You have encryption at rest and then encryption in motion. So encryption in motion is when I log into when I use my web browser to log into my web application, I'm making a authentication request over the internet from my computer, my browser, to that service. So it's making so that encrypted password that I type in, it needs to be encrypted to the service and encrypted return. So that communication in motion needs to be encrypted. Encryption at rest is when I scan a document and I store it in my document management system, I want to make sure that's encrypted so that if somebody gets to my file folders or gets into the document management system and actually accesses that file itself, like in Colonial Pipe, well, not in Colonial Pipeline, that was a ransomware, but there's a lot of hacking where they get access to the raw files. So it should be encrypted at rest. So those are the basic two kinds of encryption. As it relates to what I just talked about scanners, so when you have these network attached devices that are connecting to servers, you want to put SSL certificates on the scanners themselves that match the server so that only authorized devices can connect to authorized servers. And this SSL, if it doesn't match, then there's no handshake. Okay. So the spirit of this slide is that all encryption is not created equal. And you might have heard about Heartbleed. It was many, many years ago, but this was an open SSL vulnerability. So everybody was using open SSL, and they were using this open SSL to put certificates on their devices and their servers. And guess what happened? There was a mathematical error that basically was like a data leak, where hackers finally found the vulnerability, and it was a big deal because there was so many people using open SSL. So all encryption is not created equal. Same thing happened with Intel a couple years ago where they had a flaw in their chip and everybody was using their chips. And this one flaw was affected many people. So P3iD is an expert in encryption, and we're designing new encryption. So if you just go get off-the-shelf encryption, it's not always created equal. So I just pay attention to encryption. Another example of that relates to the centralized nature of these network scanning platforms that we need to be very cautious of and careful is this idea of supply chain attack. And we use SolarWinds ORION as an example. You might have heard of SolarWinds a couple months ago where there's major breach. Maybe you didn't know the details, but basically SolarWinds was an IT utility that helped manage updates and patches for other network services and servers and components on your network. So SolarWinds was a very trusted IT system that a lot of government agencies and a lot of even commercial agencies used to manage their networks. So SolarWinds ORION was a trusted centralized server that was allowed to connect just by default to your email system and your business system. And then when there was updates for it, it automatically patched them, which is a very useful thing, of course. But what happened is this hacker over here, this threat actor, he created a virus and then he put it in the SolarWinds deliverable. So when SolarWinds delivered their updates to their email systems and their business applications, guess what? They were also delivering the backdoor virus at the same time. So this is an example of you can't have blind trust, and you gotta verify constantly. Server to server communication, or even human to server communication. So the countermeasure is this concept of zero trust. And I'm not going to go into the detail of zero trust, but basically, just like the word says, there is zero trust between a service to service or a human to service. There should be no trust implicitly between these two services. So it's a network concept. We've got a white paper on it that I'll offer at the end of this presentation. But zero trust means that you have zero trust, and you don't trust things like SolarWinds explicitly. You should say, okay, I want to deliver this update, review the patch, make sure it's scanned for viruses, for malware, and then deliver it, something like that, right? Okay. So zero trust networking, zero trust, but verify always. Here's a little depiction of it. You got a key there. You've got some vulnerability, you got the centralized management. So you're actually checking and verifying authentication, verification, make sure that IP address of the SolarWinds server didn't change. Make sure the DNS ports were accurate, make sure that the port forwarding was right, make sure that the usernames. So there's a lot of ways that you can verify the deliverable. And this hack was pretty simple, actually. It was a DNS hack, so it wasn't too complicated, but it caused big problems and cost a lot of money. To this day, people are still cleaning it up. So the concepts of zero trust are really relevant to our industry, especially when you're talking about network attached scanners and centralized servers. So let's talk about blockchain. It's been kind of this mysterious thing in the imaging industry, but there are great use cases for it, especially for capture. Um, but I think it's been oversold, and it's not applicable in a lot of situations. But it is a good network infrastructure, and it's also a very effective way to validate transactions. That's really one of the important things. And I'm not talking about the blockchain for crypto. That's not part of this conversation. I'm talking about blockchain as an infrastructure and a logical and a database. It's a distributed ledger technology, DLT, or distributed databases. So some of the applications, distributed capture. So the capture process, just OCR itself is a very CPU intensive process. If you're doing millions of pages, it takes a long time. So you need a lot of CPU power. And with AI coming in, that takes a lot of CPU power and machine learning. So what if you can take a document and you can split it up into segments and then farm out to worker nodes doing this process, maybe a distributed OCR, and maybe these 10 worker nodes are doing 10% of the OCR, and then they feed back the results and give you a full OCR page. So you have 10 nodes, so you have 10x the workload doing the processing. So that's one example of distributed capture for blockchain. Another really obvious one that's very popular for blockchain is supply chain management. So things like food distribution. There's a good example from IBM Hyperledger on when we go through training, there's actually an example of catching fish in Japan, and then it goes through the whole supply chain of catching the fish in Japan, then it goes to the market there, and then it goes to the distributors there, and then it goes to the retail stores, and finally to your table at home. So the distributors want to validate that the tuna being caught in Japan is actually coming from Japan and it's authentic tuna. So for food safety, the distributor, the retailer can actually validate that the food supply is safe. So it's a great application for blockchain. And you can imagine in supply chain like that, there's a lot of documentation from the catching the fish to distribution of receiving the fish, receiving the inventory, packing list, the bill of materials to the retailer that finally sells it. So there's a lot of documentation in supply chain overall, and it's a good use case for blockchain and document capture. A distributed file storage is actually a use case for blockchain already. So when you're scanning images and you want to make it secure, you don't just store the PDF in one storage. You can actually say, I want to store 25% of the image file in one storage and 25% in another storage and 50% in another storage. So in order for the hacker to to assemble these documents, they have to infiltrate 3 different storage systems. So you can imagine the odds of that happening is like very unlikely. So distributed file storage is a great application for scanned images and blockchain. Know your customer. I talked about the authentication. So through blockchain, you can do what they call validation through consensus. So you can actually validate that you are who you are. Make sure that Jim's address is still valid, and make sure that his thumbprint is valid. So you could say, okay, there's these 10 validation rules, and I know you as a customer, and then that's your identity. So through blockchain, it's a great way to have basically own your own identity. Another great use case, I saw a patent actually from Xerox many years ago on document authenticity using blockchain and scan documents. So at scan time on their copy machines, you can actually scan a document, and then through blockchain, basically put an invisible digital signature on it, just like we would a physical digital signature. But it's a hidden embedded kind of technology that when the receiver gets that document, they can actually say this is kind of like a DocuSign on steroids, right? This has been validated through different sources. Maybe the IP address of the scanner has been validated, maybe the MAC address, the username, many different ways to validate that the document is a true document. Fraud detection. So this is a big deal. So when you're, and I just put, just from my experience, just in the news recently, a couple examples: PPP loans, election systems, and medical records. So there was a lot of fraud going on in the Paycheck Protection Program. It was really awful. There's billions and billions of dollars cheating that could have probably been easily detected and in real time if we had used blockchain and scanning documents. If people were applying for PPP and we could have done some validation against the data in real time and say, oh, they've already applied 10 times. Then you say, no, you know what, just stop the transaction right there. Or, you know, they've got, I don't know, they didn't qualify for some reason, right? We should have stopped the transaction. And well, like Scott Peterson, right? He's on death row and he got, it wasn't PPP, but he got unemployment, right? That transaction should have never happened. So with scanned documents and with the data from those scanned documents, you can actually validate transactions and detect fraud in real time. You can have transparency in your election systems. There's a lot of dispute about elections still, right? If we want transparency in real time, and we have a white paper on this, you can actually scan the ballots and validate the ballots are authentic and they're legitimate. So if you want to apply technology and solve problems, you can do it. So that's another example. And then last but not least, medical records. I had an injury a couple years ago and I went to physical therapy and it was on my ankle, but the physical therapy, he said, Kevin, how's your hip doing? And I said, hip? And nothing, I'm never wrong. Somehow an x-ray got into my medical record incorrectly. And it was no big deal, but it was probably a big deal for that person that needed the x-ray in their file for their physical therapy. So it was an honest mistake. I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but this happened and a misfiled system. Through a validation process, they should have said, you know, Kevin's never had a surgery on his hip. Why is a hip x-ray getting put into his medical file? So just simple things like that can be done. And you can imagine this happens probably millions of times a day, just honest mistakes. So there's a lot of good use cases for blockchain still. And we have a lot of expertise in this, and we're finding good use cases if they're properly vetted. So I've talked a lot about all these kind of technologies and trends and stuff. So let's put it all together in the final solution. So this is kind of a busy slide, but it does talk about a lot of different concepts that I've covered today so far. And I wanted to just kind of walk through it because there's a really logical process to it. If you start on the left side over here, you have your document scanner. So as I mentioned, you know, most of them are coming with network connectivity. So if that's the case, we need to secure this endpoint. It's basically an IoT device. So it's just like it's an IoT device, right? It's like your phone. You need to secure your phone too. So what do we need to do? We need to apply those digital certificates, just like I said, an SSL certificate on the scanner, an SSL certificate on the server that match, that say, okay, we can handshake, we can communicate. So that's the first thing. So create your own digital certificates. As I mentioned, they're not all created equal. So you want to make sure that you get a certificate from an authority that does these kind of things, that can validate that these are true and tried certificates. Endpoint security, just like you have antivirus on your computer. You know what? Some of these scanners need antiviruses, or they need endpoint security where you know, if the IP addresses don't match, if the MAC addresses don't match, then it locks it out from network communication. IP whitelists. It means that, you know what, if this thing doesn't have a private IP address like a 192 or a 10 dot whatever IP, private non-routable IP address, then it shouldn't communicate. So you have to approve the list. So by default, it doesn't let anything connect to the network, and you have to authorize it. So a couple things about the hardware itself. Then once you secure the endpoint, the IoT device, then you have the considerations of encryption. Like I said, the encryption from the application to the server, you know, the password needs to be encrypted. So you have in-motion encryption. When you make an authentication request, it's going through your firewall to your directory server. It can be Active Directory, LDAP, a local database. But the point is, it's making an authentication request. Oftentimes you have to have port forwarding, like on Active Directory, it's either a 389 or 636 port. There's some technologies like smart hybrid protocols that allow you to make an authentication request without opening an inbound firewall port. So that's a very cool technology that allows you to not open a firewall port here, and that's a big deal. So definitely consider that. Then even like authentication and on steroids is single sign-on. Like I said earlier, one sign-on, one password, one username for all your applications, instead of having to sign on like me, like 10 times to my 10 different applications. So you can imagine that helps people get, you know, be much more efficient. I talked about zero trust. So when you have these devices and you have this authentication server and this capture server and this storage service, you know what, there's a lot of services, service to service. So I talked about zero trust and always verify. So you have this concept that's applied to all the network concepts and services and servers on your network and devices. So you should really think about that. Authentication, identity and access. I mentioned, you know, there's this industry IAM, but they're different, right? So the capture server, again, is Kevin authorized to use this capture service? If so, I need to know where to put his documents. So there's the identity, then there's the access. You know, is Kevin authorized to access the medical records stored in here? You know, so there's a lot of identity and access concerns that go along. Secure erase. This is a big deal because as images move through this workflow, it just doesn't magically happen. Images are written to folders, and then they're processed, and then there's an out folder. So there's always an in and an out. It just doesn't magically happen. So that temporary data where you're writing these images, what if it's not erased? What if it's, you know, if your provider is sloppy and just leaves those images that have been processed, and you assume it's been erased, but somebody comes in later and they've got all the images that you've scanned for your whole time, then they can get them. So you got to make sure that there's a secure erase policy, that maybe weekly you erase it, or if you're super paranoid, after every scan, erase that temporary data and get rid of those temporary images. And then I mentioned at-rest encryption, like, you know, you have all your electronic images, but a lot of people still, there's data out there that only 7% of people actually encrypt their data. It's really unbelievable. But encryption sounds complicated, but it's actually very affordable. You know, it's only dollars per month for, you know, low volumes. It's easy to deploy. It's always on, you know, so you can't make mistakes and accidentally turn it off. So there is ways that you can encrypt your scanned images pretty easily. That isn't too complicated. So there's no excuse not to encrypt your data and at rest. And then last but not least, I already talked about blockchain. So there's a lot of applications that can make blockchain for efficiency, for transparency, for document authenticity, for better efficiencies, for just more controlled access. So a lot of ways that you can employ this. So this is putting it all together. Okay, so let me just recap kind of the four key things from this presentation regarding cybersecurity basics of cloud capture. So I talked about IAM, encryption, network, and blockchain, and I'll just recap. Identity and access control. Are you providing privacy? So there's a dirty little secret in the industry when people provide these kind of services. They're basically copying your usernames and your passwords from your Active Directory into their service, into their capture service, or into their centralized scanner service. So they're actually copying your important usernames and passwords a couple times, and that's not a good way. You want to keep the whole point of an Active Directory and LDAP is keep your usernames and passwords in one place, one centralized place that if you revoke access, then they can't get in. You shouldn't have copies of it because it's not synced in real time, and it's a security risk. So dirty little secret about copying identities from Active Directory and LDAP. Encryption, I use the example of a Heartbleed vulnerability that all encryption is not created equally. So ORION employing these concepts of forward secrecy and zero trust. There's these kind of concepts that you can create good encryption that's forward thinking. In the case of Heartbleed, it was just it was a buffer overrun basically. So they didn't imagine that compute would get to a point where you can, have a little data leak that could be exploited. But now with supercomputers, you could do that. So you have to think forwardly and create encryption that's built in a way that you can't just apply supercompute power and then break it. That was the deal with Heartbleed. Network security and zero trust. I talked about the SolarWinds example, and centralized servers are great for efficiency. You can manage all your scanners and manage all your IT devices like SolarWinds ORION was doing. But if you trust implicitly, just by default without checking, then you have this problem where the hacker came in, they infected SolarWinds ORION with the malware, and then because SolarWinds ORION was trusted, that malware got pushed out to these systems. So be careful about centralized management and make sure your providers implementing these types of things. And then blockchain, I just talked about it a lot. So a lot of different great use cases for it, providing authenticity, transparency in transactions, efficiency with distributed capture. So a lot of examples of blockchain. So a couple things that we want to give you. So P3iD has a partner program called Technology Adoption Program. So if you like what we're doing and you want to try some of our technologies, we're looking for strategic partners and corporate sponsors to take our technologies and kick the tires on them, give us feedback. You get access to you get exclusive access to like early technologies, and we want to take your feedback and build it. So you get to see stuff early. You get to influence the roadmap. So it's a great program, technology adoption program. You just go apply at p3id.com/tap. That's the acronym. So you go apply there, tell us a little bit about your project. And then this has been a great program to really innovate. So we've got a lot of innovations, just like I showed in one of those last slides. There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of new things. So we can give you the latest and greatest. And we just ask that you basically, the program's pretty simple. All you have to do is allocate a business person and a technical person for a certain amount of time. And then we can run the pilot, gather the feedback. So it's a really great program for both the partners, the end user corporate sponsors that basically have innovation labs and want to try this stuff. So it's a great program to try new innovation. And we also have a marketing program called Marketing Syndication Program. So if you're a partner, if you're a technology partner, reseller partner, integration partner, software partner, and you like kind of what P3iD is talking about, we've got some new products called ScanBot, MobileBot, ConnectorBot. If you like these and you like, but maybe you don't have a marketing department that can spin up these brochures, we can give you these presentations, videos. We can do webinars with you. We can brand these brochures with your logo, your contact name, your colors. So your customers will contact you first. You're in control of the opportunities. You're just using P3iD messaging to talk about all these new kind of things, identity management, blockchain. We have a lot of creative that we're creating all the time. So it just helps you. It's basically like a marketing in a box program. So all you have to do is just go register at p3id.com/register. just send us a little form and tell us who you are and what you're interested in doing, and then upon approval, then we can start basically giving you all our marketing materials. So those are two simple programs, TAP and MSP, that you can use to make your business better. Last but not least, I want to give you something. So I've talked about a lot of concepts at a high level. I talked about identity, zero trust, perfect forward secrecy, blockchain. We have very technical white papers on these. So if you want to get into the mathematics and really talk about the nitty gritty of these things, these are great white papers, very, very detailed, very technical. And they're all available. All you have to do is just send an email to cybersecurity@p3id.com, and then we can forward these to you. And then the very last thing I'll say is that cybersecurity is a never-ending battle. It's a fight, and as our technologies become more cloud, the hackers are getting better. I mean, through this whole COVID thing, you thought they'd take a day off, but they're more vicious than ever. So the tools that they have are getting better. Their techniques are getting better. We have to be better. We can't be sloppy. We can't be ignorant to the fact that they're out there. They're not going to take a day off, and just one itty bitty mistake can be catastrophic to your business, could be catastrophic to your career. So you don't want to be that person that makes that mistake. So that's why I'm so passionate about cybersecurity and taking it seriously, not just a checkbox, and question the technology, question your providers, consult with experts, ask questions, because you know what, it's a big deal. So I love the capture industry, and that's for productivity, but you can't offer cloud capture without these kind of security things. So with that, I want to thank everybody for attending this. This is a recorded session. We will post it on our websites, and we will send everybody that couldn't attend a link to this. If you have questions, you can email us at cybersecurity@p3idtech. Our website is p3idtech.com, or we actually still do answer the phone, 408-785-2005. And then myself, I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, on Twitter. So definitely hit us up, and I appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you very much, and have a great day.